Since time immemorial, and the resilient voices of Native Americans remain an inseparable part of our local culture. The New Orleans Information Literacy Collective would not only like to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous people of this land, but we encourage our executive board, presenters, and attendees to shift their approach to land acknowledgements and consider meaningful activities and actions to support Native communities. In consideration of our information literacy mission, we ask that over the course of the forum this week, that you take some time to support Native authors. We recommend reading a book by an Indigenous author, request a book from your local library, purchase a book from an Indigenous-owned bookstore, and purchase books for your library's collection. It costs nothing to rate and review Indigenous books. It costs nothing to recommend a book to colleagues. This call to action is a tangible way to help Native writers tell their stories, take back their narratives, and have their voices heard. These are just a few recommendations, but by no means do they encompass all the ways in which you can support Native communities. We encourage you to continue learning and participating as we aim to avoid performativity and work to be equitable, inclusive of all. A link to this land acknowledgement with a list of useful resources can be found in the footer of the NOLA ILC website, and we'll provide a direct link in the chat now, along with a Padlet of Indigenous authors and stories as recommended by the NOLA ILC Executive Board members. In a slight deviation from our standard, there will be 3 different presentations today: a short lightning talk, a 30-minute presenter, and a roundtable discussion that will last 45 minutes, after which we'll have questions from attendees. You can type your questions into the chat box at any time, and Caitlin, our chat moderator, will keep track of them for the Q&A sessions afterwards. You can also use the chat box to let us know about any tech problems that you think may be originating on our end. Finally, in the chat box, we've dropped a URL to our link tree, which includes links for our social media channels and the land acknowledgement and action statement and links. So one final note before we get started, this is being recorded and the presentation will be shared to our YouTube channel. So more information is on that at the end of this session. Okay. We are ready to get started after all that housekeeping with our first presenter. So today we're honored to welcome Claire Reinert for a lightning talk on encouraging creativity through information literacy instruction. Claire is an early career research and instruction librarian at a small university in Illinois, McKendree University. And she's very interested in identifying the best teaching practices to help librarians encourage critical and creative thinking skills in our students. So Claire, if you are ready to take over, I will mute myself and stop my video. And
awesome. Okay. Okay, hi, thank you for joining me today. My name is Claire Reinert, and I'm the research and instruction librarian at McKendree University in Southern Illinois. I've become really interested in creativity recently and how we as librarians can teach our students to be critical and creative thinkers. And my goal today is to briefly share with you some ideas that I found for embracing creativity forward library instruction. Because I want to get through this quickly, I'm not going to spend too long on the theoretical definitions of creativity. I have found that it means different things to different disciplines and that it looks different depending on the discipline. The main thing that I want to emphasize is that creativity is a habit. It's a way of thinking that can be developed and improved. I think that a lot of us used to think that creativity, you're either creative or you're not, but researchers have really started to find that it can be taught. Because I like to ground my instruction in theory, I've noted a couple of pedagogical theories here that I think can provide a good structure for creativity forward library instruction. Reflective learning is a good way to encourage students to make learning and questioning a more conscious process. A lot of us probably already engage in reflective teaching practices, and I think it can be beneficial to invite students into that process of learning from our life experiences. Constructivist approaches focus on learning from experiences. In my opinion, students don't learn best when they sit and passively absorb information, but rather when they construct their own knowledge and meaning through experiences. I think that constructivism lends itself well to library instruction because it's so task-oriented. And most of what instruction librarians, at least me in higher education, are asked to teach about is how to find and evaluate information for specific research-based assignments. Here are just a few specific ways that we could easily incorporate creativity-forward library instruction into our practice. With all the advances in AI, professors are increasingly trying to move away from research papers. And I'm frequently asked for ideas about assignments that can develop those critical and creative thinking skills, but aren't papers. One answer that I give a lot is to have students do the research and then create an infographic or some other visual representation of the information rather than a paper. They're still making connections between types of information and communicating those connections. Inquiry-based learning is a really great way to teach students how to ask good questions, which in my opinion is the spark for creativity. Creativity can be developed when students make real-world connections through inquiry and exploration. And I think it's a type of learning that fits in, again, really well with library instruction because research is a central part of the inquiry-based learning process. Essential questions are awesome. Essential questions are questions that you present to students at the beginning of a class, and they probe for deeper meaning and set the stage for further questioning and creative activity. They're a good way to engage students in reflection that can spark creative thoughts at the beginning and again at the end of class. Norman Jackson has written about a life-wide approach to instruction for creativity, which essentially means that our creativity isn't confined to the classroom. It emerges in everyday situations, and giving students the tools to respond creatively to challenges and opportunities outside the classroom as well as in the classroom can help students to deepen the understandings of their own creativity. It can provide a lot of opportunities for reflection as well. So this was really brief. So rather than giving you a laundry list of specific activities for the classroom, I tried to focus my talk today on learning theories and approaches that can help develop creative learners for a couple of reasons. One, because we all work in different institutional contexts, I wanted to focus on the foundational approaches that run through all types of library instruction. And two, I really just wanted to spark the desire to learn more about these approaches. Creativity forward library instruction is about more than just fun learning activities. I think that it emerges naturally when we let our practice be guided by a deep commitment to developing creative learners and by grounding our pedagogy in the approaches that also center student learning experiences and student creative thinking. Finally, here are some places that I would recommend starting if you're interested in learning more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Claire. That was such an informative lightning talk. And since this is being recorded, we will send out this to everyone if you'd like to send your slides as well, so people can see those future further readings. We could do that too. We're going to save our questions until the Q&A at the end, but if you do have a question for Claire, you can put it in the chat and we will get to that at the end. So next we have Shukrani Gray of the New Orleans Public Library with Increasing Our Reach, New Orleans Public Library's Journey to the Reach Center. Ready to take it away, Shukrani?
I am.
Yes, we can see your screen and I am.
Just one question. Is the panelist, is it blocking the PowerPoint?
No, not for me. No. I can see your PowerPoint perfectly.
Yay, good morning, everyone. I am Shukrani Gray, and this is Increasing Our Reach, New Orleans Public Library's Journey to the Reach Center. I'm sorry, I'm looking for one thing. There we go. So I am Shukrani Gray. I wanted to start with a little story about me in library school to kind of frame why I took this approach at the African American Resource Collection, where I started at the New Orleans Public Library. So in library school, someone said, you know, what would the ideal position be for you? And I said, you know, throughout my career, I've always been an advocate for the community. And so the perfect job as a librarian would be somewhere where I could provide access to information for underserved and underrepresented people, probably in an urban area. So imagine my joy when I was invited to apply as the African American Resource Collection librarian at the New Orleans Public Library. It was a dream come true. And so, you know, that was the beginning of this journey that we're going to go on to creating a Reach Center in the New Orleans Public Library. So, of course, I started at University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, where I got an MLIS in archival management and a master's degree in anthropology. So I always use that social lens in all of my work. Coming out of library school. No, actually, I was still in library school. I worked at Delgado Community College here in New Orleans as the information literacy adjunct, in which I still work. But my first professional job was as the circulation department manager at Jefferson Parish Library at the main branch. And then I moved to the New Orleans Public Library, where I started as the African American Resource Collection librarian. And then that position expanded to the African American Resource Collection Equity and Inclusion Librarian. And now I am the head of Access and Opportunity. And all of those elevations of that position also coincide with the growth of the Reach Center and all of the services that we offer through that entity. So there could be no Reach Center without a team. This definitely sometimes feels like it's all on me, but I had a wonderful team and have a wonderful team at the New Orleans Public Library to support this work. So we had the director of marketing, who is Jane LeGros. April Martin is the regional manager at Maine. At that time, she was my first supervisor, and it was April and I that sat and created this long-term plan for the African American Resource Collection at that time. The first person to open the door to a larger view of the AARC was Gabriel Morley, who was the director of the New Orleans Public Library at that time. And he kind of gave the green light for us to have a standalone building. At that time, it was on my plan, but I thought it was going to take, you know, years and years and years. And I think I had been there maybe 2 years. And Dr. Morley said, I have this vision for the AARC that it has a standalone space. And I was like, say less, I already have a plan. And so now I am working directly with our current director, Emily Payton, and she has been wonderful in supporting this work and in guiding this work. And so we could not do it without Jerry Pinkston, because we do have a technology aspect of our mission, and he has helped us to bring that into fruition. And then last but not least, Michelle Thompson. Oh my goodness. So none of this kind of work can happen without the support of the business office manager. She makes sure the budget is completed, that we have the funds that we need, because this large program has to find funding within our larger budget. So the pathway to success. Now I can't see. Okay, there we go. So we had several steps to creating this endeavor. We had to update the AARC mission to expand it to be this larger standalone entity. We increased our programming. We created a social media presence. We had to build community partnerships. I did a national survey of other African American resource centers, and then we had to execute the plan. So this is really the outline of what we will be talking about in this presentation. Oop. Oop. There we go. So step one, when I inherited, and I say I inherited this, it's such an honor to be a part of the AARC legacy, which started in the 90s as a response to the need for our community to have better representation. And so when I got to the New Orleans Public Library, it was necessary because they originally had a space in the main library on the second floor. But when I got there, they did not have a space dedicated to the AARC. There is a collection at the main branch, and it is still at the main branch on the first floor. If you get a chance, please check us out. It is a nonfiction collection and also a small reference section. But we needed to expand it to say, you know, what would we do in a standalone space? So we beefed up the mission. We created a collection policy and added some things, which I'll talk about in a second. We put a real big lens on expanding programming, both in the branches and in the community. We added outreach and community involvement, which is part of our partnerships. And then we added a social media component. And then later in the process, we acquired the Equity Task Force, which is an internal committee, which their job is specifically to look at communication, to look at our practices internally to make sure that we are representing all members of the staff and making sure that everyone is in a safe and supportive work environment, but also to make sure that our programs and our services are reflective of our community. And so the addition that we did to the collection policy, I wanted to make sure that we included more books on health, financial, and digital literacy, and to emphasize cultural and historical stories and authors. And so that includes our local stories, our local community activists, and our local community scholars. And all of that is the basis of our program. So this picture here is and I pulled a lot of pictures directly from what we do here in New Orleans. This is a picture of us at our outreach. And so we wanted to increase the technology. So we're using these tablets that allow us to have access to the internet while we're out in the community. And it allows us to check out books. It allows us to sign up people with library cards. It allows us to look at people's fines and things like that, which now we don't have fines, but back then we did. And so my approach to increasing programs, we wanted to make sure that we were connecting our programs with the AARC collection and the new AARC mission, but also with the New Orleans Public Library collection. And that is one of the biggest comments that we get from people who attend our events and our outreach, is that I didn't know that we could check out books when we're not in the branch. So I'm so happy that that is an addition that we were able to bring. When I first inherited the AARC, our major program was the Martin Luther King annual program, and I wanted to expand that. And so the first thing I did was increase the school participation. And generally we have up to 300 to 400 students and teachers and community members who attend that event. It is a citywide event. And then the other way that we increased it, we figured out ways to add a virtual component. And so, especially during the pandemic, we were able to do exclusively virtual programming. And that helped us to reach schools that did not have the ability to come to the actual face-to-face program. And so that almost doubled our participation. We wanted to further develop virtual programs. And so we've done specific or exclusively virtual programs, but we've also made sure that we can include some video links or Facebook Lives in our programming to increase the access to the community. We've also added research services to high schools who have either English projects or Black History program projects. And so we offer classes on how to use databases, how to write thesis statements and things like that. And then we increased our outreach services. So we bring our table, we have books from the collection, we have, you know, library card signups, we have giveaways. And so this was all in an effort to increase our community presence. The next step was to create a strong social media presence. And so this is an example of one of the posts that we have. This is our anti-racism resource list for all ages. This was featured on our regular library page, but we also use this as part of our marketing plan, which said we would do book lists, we would do video lists to highlight our Canopy database. On our dedicated Facebook page, we highlight our events, we highlight community programs, and we highlight our community members. We wanted to reinstate the African American Resource Collections email. So we do a bi-monthly email blast, also highlighting our events, highlighting our services. And then we developed a marketing communication plan. And, you know, a lot of this is an example of trial and error in this process. We were having programs and we were needing to have a better way to communicate our needs to our marketing team. And so we together worked on a monthly meeting that we go through what's going to be on our social media page, what's going to be on our email, what special programs do we have, what is the Equity Task Force doing. And so every month we meet with marketing so that we can be intentional about what we're putting on in our communication spaces. And last but not least, most recently, we have created the AARC, which is now the Reach Center page on the New Orleans Public Library's website. So all of these helped us to beef up our presence in the virtual world as well as in the community. Step 4 is building community partnerships. And this is really a big piece of what the Reach Center does. We wanted to identify local culture bearers so that we could support them in through our programs, so that we could provide a space for them when they wanted to do workshops or they want to do programs with the community. We could do partnerships with the library, which is really beneficial to small businesses, to culture bearers who may not have a lot of access to funds. And so now when you partner with the library, it connects them with our marketing department. It connects them with some of the resources that we may have. And so it's just a real good deal on both sides. This flyer is one of the partnerships we had with the Global Groove Collective. And we provided a virtual online concert that was national. So we had artists from South America, from West Africa, from South Africa, all over the world. And it was just a really wonderful program. We targeted local institutions that maybe we had partnerships with in the past, but we wanted to revitalize them. And an example of 3 of our big partners are Shape Culture Center, Community Book Center, and Ogden Museum of Southern Art. We were able to do programming with these institutions. We've been able to do outreach with these institutions. It's just been a really good partnership. And we also partner with local businesses to provide our community libraries. So we have 7 spaces in New Orleans where we provide free books to the community for them to read, either in the business. For example, we have Nola Plant Bay. She has a plant business and she does programs there. And we have a shelf in her business where people can read while they're waiting, or they can take the books home. So to kind of summarize all that we did as the AARC to kind of build what we do so that when we transition into the Reach Center, we had a solid leg in the community. And so these pictures represent kind of all of the things that we've done. This top picture, of course, is me at the African American Resource Collection, which is located still in the main branch on the first floor. And so that is where our books are located. Next to it is a program that we did with the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. And we had an interactive program that featured work from students in some of the local middle schools and high schools after they did a social justice workshop provided by the Ogden Museum. And then we had interviews that we had people could listen to through earphones and see some of the stories of local people in New Orleans who had participated in the civil rights movement or who were currently participating in social justice movements. Next to it is our health literacy initiative. And so we partnered with Sisters on Wheels and did a bicycle ride, one of which we have coming up this Friday. So we like to incorporate activities also that the community can benefit from. Below that is Remember, Celebrate, Act. That was our first virtual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. And with that, we had a virtual component where schools could just log in during the celebration. We also provided a booklet that teachers could use with their classes. It summarized the stories that we told in Remember, Celebrate, Act. They had activities, and then we connected it to some of the social studies curriculum. Ready, Set, Bank is a financial literacy program that we incorporated with Capital One Bank, geared towards seniors and helping them to navigate the digital world of their banking system. And then at the bottom, we have Mr. Rankins, which is one of our teachers who brought us in every year to talk to his African Studies class. And we worked with their class on their final project to go through databases, to go through having searches and how to create their thesis statements. So finally, we were in the process of really honing in on a space, and we wanted to be to practice best practice in creating what the Reach Center would do. So I did a survey of several African American resource repositories. And I visited the African American Library and Cultural Center in Fort Lauderdale. This is a picture of their African American Research Library and Cultural Center. So they have a library, they have a programming space, they have a auditorium, and they consistently do programming with the community. We have the Auburn Research Library in Atlanta, Georgia, part of the Fulton County Library. I went to the Langston Hughes Collection in Queens, New York, at the Queens Public Library. And then I finally visited the Schomburg Center for Research and Black Culture in New York, part of the New York Public Library. And the questions that I asked were, what are your funding sources? What is your reporting structure? How do you organize your staffing? What kind of programs do you do? What is your collection development? What is your collection policy? And then what is your structure within the public library system? So what was unique about these places that we chose is that they're all situated within a public library system. And that was really important because we wanted to see how they mirror or fit into the larger library system. So this was really informative. And then finally, we execute the plan. And so what you see here is where the Reach Center is, and that's me, and that is Greg, our library associate, and that is Kim, my librarian. I could not do any of this work without them. And so this is our signage, which was a big deal. We just, another thing that we learned trial and error is that because our building is kind of off of the main street, it was really important to have signage that directed people to the building. And sometimes that seems like it would be, you know, kind of self-explanatory, but it wasn't. And so we had to really look at where should we put the signage outside, and also how do we navigate people to our spaces within the building. The entire building is not our space. We have a space on the 3rd floor, which is a co-working space. And then we have a space on the 2nd floor, which is our art gallery. And so it is located in the Corpus Christi Epiphany Community Center, part of the, we rent from the Archdiocese. Oh, I'm sorry, let me back up. Before we moved into the building, I created a Reach Center plan of action, and that outlined, you know, what kind of programs we do, who are we targeting when we bring in artists, when we bring in community scholars, what are our partnerships, what are we doing with the art gallery, how are we incorporating the AARC collection and all of that. And so we brought in tech equipment. So one of the things I wanted to do is really be a resource for entrepreneurs in the community, and not just in the BIPOC community, but in the whole New Orleans community, all people included. And so we got cameras, we have backdrops, we have mics, anything that people can use to record, because social media is so important to small businesses. We also have laptops that people can use within the center, and that they can use within the co-working space. We also provide printing for people who are in our space. We had our soft opening September 2023. And so we really were trying to just get people to know that we were in the community. And we did a dance class, we did headshots for entrepreneurs, free headshots. We had singing bowl meditation, we had yoga class, and other activities. And so now we're doing our welcome ceremony, which is August the 15th from 6 to 8. We are opening a exhibit called Don't Stand Alone. And it is our first major exhibit in the space. We're really excited about that. And so now we're up and running. We are connecting with the community to do more programming. It's kind of hard because we only have a staff of 3, and we have to navigate all of these things within the building and also outside in the community with just us 3. We do offer our space to organizations that might need a meeting space, that might need, you know, we've had people teach their classes or have their meetings in our art gallery, because there is a quiet space in there, to have meetings in our co-working space. So it has really been well received within the community. Okay. So I have a question. It says, can you speak to how you develop relationships with the local schools and high schools to encourage them to use the libraries? It was a process, and it ebbs and it flows, because at first we had teachers, a lot of the teachers were people that I knew that said, hey, I know you are the head of the African American Resource Collection. Can you come and talk to our students? So now we've incorporated a form on our webpage that teachers can go to and request that we come out to their school. We incorporated that in our main page, and then we also talk about it in our emails, and we post about it on social media. But recently there's been an exodus of teachers. And so I lost all of my contacts. So now I have to go and physically go to the schools again and reconnect to see if they would like our services. And there's been a change in the culture at the schools. And so it's kind of hard sometimes to get into the schools. But once you get in, they call you every year to do the same presentation over and over again. We also work with our outreach department because they also have a extensive relationship with schools in the city. So it's a multi-pronged approach where I identify schools myself that I reach out to and offer our services. We offer to the teachers to be able to request our services, and then we work with our outreach department to identify schools that might need our services. I hope that answered your question. Oh, thank you. Thank you. We worked with the marketing department. Someone said great signage. That was Caitlin. We worked with our marketing department to be really intentional about our branding. And so the colors, there was a whole meeting about what colors we would use, how would we situate the name of the center, and then we had to make sure we included at Corpus Christi. And this that you see is actually one of our blunders, which is we've called it the Corpus Christi Center and then found out later it was the Corpus Christi Epiphany Center. And so we had to go back and change our signage. So that logo that you see is one of our old ones. And with that, if you don't have any more questions, I am done.
Hey, yes, if you think of another question, guys, y'all can just put it in the chat or the Q&A, and we will get to it at the end of our of today's forum. So next up we have the roundtable. Sorry, I lost my spot. So thank you, Shakrani, for all of that. We love hearing about that. Those programs sound amazing. So we have a roundtable made up of Adam, and I already forgot how to pronounce your last name, Adam. So feel free, because it's like Beauchamp.
Excellent.
Maybe said it wrong. There you go. William Buckingham, Dustin Dirksen. I could have said that wrong.
You got it.
And Janine Smith, and they're going to discuss curating primary sources for diverse user groups.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us for this final panel session of the day. I'm Adam Beauchamp. I'm the head of research and instruction at Loyola University, New Orleans, and I'll be serving as moderator for our panel today. Each of them will introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their work curating primary sources for diverse groups. But just to start us off, I wanted to sort of set the table a little bit about what we're talking about when we talk about primary sources. So a primary source is actually a tricky thing to define. And if you're interested, there are excellent guidelines created by the Society of American Archivists and the Rare Books and Manuscript section of ACRL. And I'll put that link in the chat in a moment. But basically, they explain that primary sources aren't limited to particular formats. They don't have to be in archives necessarily, but they are simply any form of evidence for a research question or inquiry. And so what counts as a primary source will actually vary quite a bit depending on what question you're asking. And so our panelists will talk a little bit about how they have used primary sources to reach diverse and new audiences in different ways. And we'll hear about different types of primary sources that they've been using. And I'll also mention that you don't have to work in archives or special collections to include primary sources in information literacy instruction or other forms of engagement with our communities. Just as an example, oftentimes if I'm not collaborating with a fellow archivist in integrating primary sources into my own instruction, I will pull things from the stacks. I will pull things from the internet, subscription databases. Depending on what the topic is that students are working with, the possibilities are almost endless for what constitutes a primary source and how you can help them to engage in some really interesting research questions and engagements. So without further ado, let me quickly pivot over to our panelists. We're going to go each in turn as they talk about the projects. And I have some questions prepared to sort of kick off our discussion after each of them talks a little bit about the project that they're going to talk about today. So let's go ahead and get started. Will, you are first.
Hi, good morning. I'm Will Buckingham. So happy to be here. Thank you, Adam, for the introduction and for participating as moderator. I'd just also like to thank Janine for all her work putting this together, and my colleagues at Delgado for inviting me to participate in this organization and being so welcoming and supportive. I'm really excited to talk about this. I'm going to talk about my work on the Louisiana Decima Project here at the Institute for Public Ethnomusicology. I'll try to briefly introduce my work on the project. I'm going to start a timer first so I don't go over my allotted time. I'll introduce my work on the project and try to focus on the challenges I'm facing from an information literacy perspective and pose some questions, or at least vent some of my frustrations and challenges to you all. This work goes back over 10 years to research I conducted for my doctoral dissertation in ethnomusicology in the mid-2010s. I'll actually need to start with a little bit of historical context and actually go back to the 1770s to talk about this group of Louisianans known as the Louisiana Isleños. And this is a community and a group who identify as the descendants of colonists from the Spanish Canary Islands, who settled in St. Bernard Parish, just southeast of New Orleans in the really distal coasts of alluvial Southeast Louisiana in the late 18th century. And remarkably, these communities were able to sustain their language, a unique dialect of Spanish, and unique oral traditions in that language, stories, songs, and other folklore through the late 20th century, even into the early 21st century. And I was interested in a unique local tradition of Spanish ballad that was cultivated by this group, which is known as the Isleño Decima. If that word rings a bell for you, this is the same word and it used in a different context than the Pan-Hispanic poetic genre with 10 lines. This is a different genre with the same name. So this is a lexical shift. And I was an ethnomusicologist, so really the sort of fundamental methodology in that field is fieldwork, is ethnography. So you go out into the field and talk to people and interview people and do participant observation. But by the time I had started my research, only a handful of Spanish speakers were still alive who spoke the old dialect, and I couldn't find anyone who remembered more than a few fragments of this once extensive and vital song tradition. I would sit down with potential informants, culture bearers in their 70s mostly, but I also spoke to younger people as well, excited to learn what they remembered about these songs, only to have my questions dismissed. That's all lost, they would say, shaking their heads. But meanwhile, I was conducting archival research, and I was working with these historical field recordings from a philologist named Samuel Armistead, who conducted fieldwork in St. Bernard Parish in the 70s and 80s and recorded hundreds of, maybe 100 hours of field recordings of interviews and recordings of people singing these songs and other forms of Isleño folklore. I originally found them in Professor Armistead, he had recently passed away in his office before they had even been taken in by the UC Davis Special Collections. And there were other tapes, related tapes at UNO that I was looking at. These were all on cassette tape at the time. They were very brittle. They were warped, so they would speed up and slow down. And I felt like I had discovered treasure, right? Like I couldn't believe this was in here. And all the people I was talking about, nobody knew about this, that their heritage had been preserved in this way. And so I got to work. I did the best I could. I made digital copies of the tapes as I listened to them. And then I brought those recordings back into my fieldwork. So I'd sit down with those informants again and share what I had found. And we listened to these songs together. And this provided the thrust of my dissertation research, this sort of cross methodological project of bringing primary sources from the archive into my fieldwork and learning about this tradition that way. And yeah, my informants were surprised. Like there were a few I had made a few friends whose like parents or grandparents or yeah, uncles and aunts were on these recordings, and I got to share them with them and learn from them about what they remembered about the social context of these recordings. And it was a very, very fruitful and rewarding experience. But anyway, that was the germ of this idea. That's now what I'm calling the Louisiana Decima Project, of figuring out how to get these tapes out of the archive and disseminated, published, and curated in a way that they could be valuable to my informants, Isleño descendants, but also, yeah, I'm going to skip around in my notes here, but also diverse audiences, the theme of this panel. I knew they needed to be valuable to monolingual English speakers like my informants. Many of the tapes are all in Spanish. There's also some where they switch between English and Spanish, which is really challenging when you're trying to input these things, figure out how to input them into Omeka. And I also wanted to reach out to Spanish-speaking communities, like more recent Spanish-speaking immigrant communities in Louisiana, and bring these diverse Hispanophone traditions together. I wanted to be valuable to educators, even for school children, but also like it's an archive, and it needs to be a research archive also. So we're treating like all these recordings by Armistead as a FONS, right, in original order, referencing the original recordings and the original metadata that we have attached to them. So awesome. I'm not over time. I'm going to share my screen and just, yeah, so those are the big challenges. That's what I want to ask you all about. And I'll show you what I've been trying to do. Oh, funding. Yeah, we applied for grants. We got $2,000 from the Jazz and Heritage Foundation, another $5,000 in unrestricted grant funding from the Keller Family Foundation. That was last year. That grant cycle is wrapping up next month, but we just got $5,000 from the Louisiana Endowment from the Humanities. So we're just getting started, and it's just starting to take off. So yeah, we've digitized. Let's see. Let me get back to my notes here. Yeah, I found, 2022, I founded this nonprofit to apply for funding, and started trying to work with UC Davis Special Collections, UNO, the Louisiana Center for Louisiana Studies at University of Louisiana Lafayette, where they have this huge program of curating magnetic tape and yeah, audio recordings of folklore. And yeah, we have 21 tapes that have been digitized and shared with us from UC Davis, and another 29 that are going to be sent to a vendor and that we're paying for with our grant funds. And looking forward, we're hoping to do the same with the collections at UNO, which Center for Louisiana Studies are actually going to digitize. And trying to use, let's see, I'm going to share screen here. There's so many great resources for this kind of digital librarianship. All right. Great. So you should be able to see my screen now. This is the interface for the oral history metadata synchronizer through Aviary. Can someone tell me if they can see my screen? I got my.
We can see it. We're good, Will.
Great. So look, I'll go and yeah, click on preview. This is one of the first tapes in the collection, and I'm just working on it. Oh, this is what I have. So I'll just play this so you can hear a little bit. And I'm trying to get the formatting of this transcription sorted out, but I'll show you what I got back from our linguist, Shane Leaf. This incredible document. We're going to start right at the beginning of this song transcription. And you can see we have the Spanish translations with these notes on the right, showing this linguistic and significance in terms of features that are specific to Isleño Spanish. And then we have the translation on the right. And the challenge is figuring out how to input this into OHMS and upload it to Omeka and present it in a way that's usable for the different user groups that I mentioned. So I'm out of time, so I'll just play a few seconds of it.
Cuando Huila se embarcó, eran las 7 del día. Voy para la Ribero 100 y voy a perder la vida. Si Huila no se nos muere y no nos sucede de nada, yo caco de ver su tierra de una punta a la otra arada. Al cantar el maíz tierno y bichuela tierna en la punta.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there. It winds up being a funny song about a mule who drowns. It's not that funny, but anyway, I'll leave it there. I got to move on. Thank you so much. I'll pass it along to Dustin, I think.
Thanks, Will. If anybody has any questions about the drowned mule, they can put those in the Q&A,
Yeah.
and we'll get to those at the end. Go ahead, Dustin, you're next.
All right, thank you, Adam, and thank you, Will. I'm going to approach this from a slightly different angle. Will has spent quite a bit of time focusing on the folklore tradition, and if you have the chance, please take a look at his work. It's a great work in progress, and much appreciate him showing me that and bringing me onto this panel. I want to approach this as an instructor. I have about 20 years of classroom instruction before I became a librarian, which is a more recent career shift. I've been a librarian here at Delgado in New Orleans for a couple of years. And prior to that, I spent about a decade at TCU, Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas, which is not dissimilar to Tulane, a private 4-year liberal arts institution. And when I was at that location, I had my foot in many areas. I was a part of the intensive English program. I was a part of the Department of English, as well as the Department for English for Speakers of Other Languages. I was working a lot with international students as well as domestic students. And semester after semester, I found myself leading a couple of sections of freshman composition. The name of the course was, let's see if I can, Introductory Composition, Writing as Inquiry. And so at a place like TCU, there's about 11,000 students. And so that means about 2,800 of those students are freshmen. And as we know, all those freshmen need to take freshman composition no matter their major. So you're having about 1,300 to 1,400 students roll through this course every semester. And so because of those numbers and just trying to keep it streamlined, there was a common syllabus that was available to all adjunct or full-time faculty to use. Within this common syllabus, there was a big project towards the end of the semester called ethnographic research. And essentially, students were required to go out off of campus, out of their bubbles, and to interact with some segment of the local population. So I would give students a lot of leeway, a lot of flexibility to go and choose something that they were interested in. Students would choose anything from firefighters to the local food pantry to skaters to equestrian therapy, you name it. There was all kinds of directions that these students would go in. But the key elements that they all had to follow were the tenets of field work. And so when I talk about field work, we're talking about students going out and first and foremost, observing the culture, whatever group they're interested in, setting up some type of observation experience. And this would be accompanied by field notes that they would take while on site. They would be they would listen for specific jargon or specialized vocabulary that the subculture might use. They would look for artifacts or 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional objects that were imperative to the work or the activities that this particular group was engaged in. In addition to that, they would need to conduct an interview. And so in order to conduct an interview, one needs interview questions and one needs to know kind of what they're searching for. So you can't just go out there blind. And so getting this back to our topic of sources, students would engage in some preliminary secondary research or tertiary, looking at maybe annotated bibliographies, encyclopedia type reference entries, getting a grounding of the group they're interested in order to formulate questions for their interview, and also conducting secondary research to consider maybe what's happening on a national level or state level or international level with that particular group or phenomenon that they're interested in. That would enable them to go out and to conduct this field work with confidence. And when they were out there, they could also take photos. They would take potentially videos. Of course, all of this had to be consented by the participants. So one of the requirements for an ethnographic focus for a composition class is we would work up a consent form. Students would contact potential participants. They would get signed consent forms back and turn those into me as the instructor. And then they could engage in all of these activities that were permitted. Again, photography, video, audio recordings of the interviews, so that they could at a later date transcribe that interview into a hard copy, which would be submitted with their portfolio of research. So at the time, I didn't really think about it as a librarian. I was thinking about it as an instructor. But what the students were really doing, as we can label it now, is they were creating primary sources. They were also referring to secondary sources. And through this 5-week project, they were combining secondary and primary sources or tertiary sources to create a composition that was hopefully successful in terms of Aristotelian appeals like logos and ethos and pathos. And so, and some students were able to do that very well. And so one of the things that I would require for the secondary level of research was to look at local media. And so news outlets, local newspapers, those were really go-to sources. And we often had those as proprietary databases, like we often do here at our colleges and universities in Louisiana, where they could find out, is there any information about this group or this person that's already out there? Maybe there's some prior interviews or magazine articles that have been written. And so that would help them to go through this research as well. And so, yeah, that's kind of the basis of what we were doing with ethnography. And I thought it to be quite successful in a lot of ways. The students were very engaged and really felt like the work they were doing by creating primary sources was making it their own. They weren't just reading the analysis of someone else or the summary of another expert. They were actually going out into the field and creating these resources themselves, submitting them, and then developing their composition that way. So they were very engaged. And at the end of the day, at the end of the 5 weeks, they were also required to give a final draft, the completed version, complete with photos, to the person who agreed to be their participant or the group if they did multiple interviews. And so I felt like that really connected them even more to the group that they were observing and interviewing. So fast forward a few years, now I'm a librarian. Now I'm at Delgado Community College, and as we do, we stroll into someone's class for a one-shot library instruction session. And what's the project they're doing? Ethnography. And so I found it, maybe it's just coincidence, but I feel like there's a lot of this happening on college campuses. Maybe at your respective institutions, if this type of research is being asked of students by their teachers or faculty. And so I started thinking, wow, is this really something that's been happening for a long time? And I went to Eric and found on that database an article from 1991 by Penelope Wong titled An Ethnographic Approach to Teaching Writing in a Freshman Composition Classroom. So obviously this has been going on for decades. And so just a couple of interesting points that I'll bring out from her paper, and I'm quoting here: the process of fieldwork, students learn that writing really is composed of events and interactions with people using the medium of language. In addition, we regarded writing as a kind of relationship, one involving the constant negotiation between the writer, the reader, and the subject. And of course, those are typical rhetorical considerations for any composition in any classroom. Furthermore, a little later on, when talking about fieldwork, she notes that through fieldwork, students took an active role in their own learning, gathering information, and learned to become critical and sensitive participant observers. And so I feel like that's a really interesting way to approach, as opposed to just utilizing secondary sources 100% of the time, sitting at the computer, going through databases, which of course is necessary, but it's nice when you can kind of blend this combination of primary and secondary to help. Another quote: students had to evaluate and interpret. And that's something that primary sources enable students to do. Secondary sources, as we know, are often, they have that type of analysis or evaluation inside of that publication. But with primary, often it's up to the student to do that interpretation. So yeah, it's given me a lot to think about. Got another minute or so here. I'll try to finish up. But I think there's a lot of benefits to incorporating primary sources into research, particularly at that level of freshman level in college. I think there are some challenges. Maybe we can get to that a little bit later in the roundtable. But yeah, as a librarian now, the struggle is I'm not in the classroom. I can't guide the students week by week through their field work. I get one opportunity to go in and try to expose them, to help them wayfind their way to these digital libraries that need to relate to a very specific topic that they have in mind. And so I think that's the big challenge for us right now. So I'll turn it back over to Adam for the next participant.
Thanks, Dustin. I think we can all agree that the one shot is librarians' greatest pedagogical challenge and has been for quite some time. And if I can use an Olympics metaphor, we'll pass the baton to the anchor of our relay race here. Janine, go ahead and share your work.
Thanks. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Janine Smith. I am the University Archivist and Special Collections Registrar at Loyola University, New Orleans. And essentially, my main responsibilities are preserving, maintaining, and advancing the university archive collections, working with donors and other stakeholders at the university to acquire singular items as well as whole collections. And the other piece to this is education and instruction. And I serve as the library liaison to the Languages and Cultures Department. And I provide information literacy and library instruction in the first year seminar program kind of as needed. And perhaps the most important part of that is providing primary source instruction. So I'll talk a little bit about Loyola's mission and then this primary source initiative that we've sort of begun here in Special Collections and Archives, and just some of the takeaways that I've had over the past year and a half that I've been here in this position. So the core of Loyola's mission for a Jesuit education is to develop the whole person. So you'll see inside and outside of our core subject areas, you'll find classes that are titled things such as diversity and faith in healthcare and protest and performance in Latin America throughout our catalog. And to give you a little background information about where we're coming from in terms of our primary source instruction and efforts, a former colleague here in Special Collections developed an initiative that aligns with our library's strategic goals that he piloted in the 2022-2023 academic year. And in brief, the main goals of this project were to spark scholarly engagement through creative outreach, instruction, events, and exhibits, and to expand the invisibility of special collections and archives. The pilot goals were to build towards finalizing primary source literacy as an instructional offering in the Monroe Library and in special collections and archives. To gauge the interest among and consult with the faculty for curricular integration and alignment, and to develop an initial set of instructional approaches and types, and to explore potential outreach opportunities for promoting awareness of primary source literacy instruction as an available option. So since my colleague's departure, I've been attempting to further these goals and initiatives. And as I mentioned, I've been here for about 1.5 years. So being a new faculty member has proved really fruitful in terms of meeting other faculty who are also new, who are eager and interested, and they're trying to develop and build their courses. So I've made a lot of great connections with our new faculty members. And my suggestion to librarians and archivists who are looking to kind of expand their primary source instruction is really to put yourself out there, to get in front of your faculty as much and as often as possible. And this can be done in a few different ways. You know, if you have new faculty orientation, try to get on their agenda. If you have convocation breakout sessions, department meetings, and also if you are liaison to different departments, I've found that my relationship with the language and cultures department has been really successful, and they've been very open and receptive to receiving primary source instruction in their classes. So the other piece to that is trying to come up with creative ways to engage students when you do get them into your spaces. And I think there is something to be said for getting those original documents into the hands of students, letting them marvel at the way a document feels, the way a document smells. And I've had a lot of success with the getting to know you, the getting to know you document activities, through the National Archives. So that can be found. I think Adam's going to drop the link for that. But some of my most memorable teaching experiences have been working with the diversity and faith and healthcare class I mentioned earlier. What I did was I curated a group of documents that relate to papers from, they're documents in our papers from the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. It's a mouthful. And what I did was, and I'll share my screen here for just a moment, I developed an activity that I borrowed from a colleague. We'll call it the jigsaw activity. And essentially what I did was I had a group of documents, and you can either do this with a group of documents or a singular document that's split into like 4 different sections. And the idea is to have a group of students in a home group who will then travel to different groups to read the different documents. And they come back to determine what these documents have in common, how are they related, and what larger purpose might they serve. And the discussions that came out of that group were really just very thoughtful. And, I was really excited to be in that conversation. So let me stop share. And so the other side to using primary sources is collecting them. And I think it's just as important to think about the creators of primary sources as it is to think about the users. And this concept forces me to think critically about what materials we are bringing into the archive. And, as I'm doing this, I'm thinking of what archival gaps and silences are we filling? And if you're not familiar with the term archival silence, the Society of American Archivists defines it as the gap in the historical record resulting from the unintentional or purposeful absence or distortion of documentation. So in other words, by collecting, are we amplifying voices and histories that have previously been marginalized or left out? So I think about how we might consider reparative description and content warnings that extend respect to both our users and to the creators as well. And part of this work is informed by this shifting to a decolonial framework, which calls for community engagement and incorporating societal provenance. And maybe I can expand upon that a little bit later on. But what does this bring for the future of our primary source instruction at Loyola? What I really like to do is to continue to identify collections that are shaped by social justice and DEI, and to map them to related classes. And with that, I'd like to engage with students, especially with the university collections. I'm beginning to look at an outline of what a course centered around the university archives might look like. And I'd like to explore avenues in which students can create with those primary sources. So it's been, it's been a whirlwind in the past 1.5 years. So that's where we're at in our primary source initiative. And a lot of what we are trying to do is to look for ways for us to engage with the community, to find different diverse user groups, that might be interested in our collections, but also look at the diverse user groups within the university as well. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Adam to connect the dots for us here.
All right, excellent. Quick thank you to Caitlin for reposting all of the links that I wasn't able to share with all of the audience, just a weird quirk of Zoom, it seems. So hopefully you've been able to see the links as that we've been posting throughout. Just a couple of questions to get us started, and as we're having this discussion, I encourage everyone to put any questions you have into the Q&A, either about our roundtable or the earlier presenters, and we'll have a couple of minutes of discussion here before we open it up to the whole group. Just as a starting question, one of the things I find interesting about all three of our panelists is that they're talking about both creating new primary sources and thinking of new ways to engage audiences with collections that maybe already are accessible or either in archives or online. So I wonder if one or all of you could talk a little bit about what is the balance between that either creation or acquiring new materials in order to engage with diverse audiences versus trying to rethink the things we already have access to create more engagement.
Well, that is the question, isn't it, Adam? I feel like that is the crux of my job, is to try to reach out to different user groups, as well as how do we get more student engagement and involvement in student-led and student-created collections and items. But I've had a lot of thought about this, and a couple of things that I'd like to look to do is to potentially do like a student curated exhibit. So that's where they get their hands on the primary sources, and they're determining what would make the most sense to get something together as an exhibit. And so you're getting both primary source, but then they're also in the process of creating as well. I don't know, there's a lot to be said there. I have plenty of other projects in mind of things that allow students to both curate items, but are also in the process of creating as well. So I don't know, it's a balance. It's, it's a fine line of trying to do both, right?
Will or Dustin, you care to respond?
Sure.
Oh, go ahead.
Right. I mean, I would just say, like, it would be really easy to just get all these tapes digitized and throw them on YouTube or something. But it was my experiences doing field work. I'm still doing community outreach, interviewing people and asking them for their input on this project, Culture Bearers in St. Bernard Parish. And what's been evident to me from the beginning is that to do these recordings justice and to make them useful and valuable to the community, it's going to take a lot more than that. So that's why we're starting with hiring linguists and transcribing and translating and figuring out how to host them in a user-friendly way. To me, yeah, that's imperative for the work that we're doing.
And I would just add that you're talking about this striking balance. I think it's important to show the value to the stakeholders, and I'm speaking of faculty specifically when I'm thinking about universities and colleges. If the faculty can see an applied value of having their students utilize primary sources for their projects, then we're probably more inclined to get more activity around those collections. Oftentimes, when I step into a classroom, I hear faculty say, well, go to the databases or go to the library and get this book, but it's often in the world of secondary only. And I don't think we've really opened it up to the potential that primary sources can offer. And I'll just take it back to what I said earlier about the concept of, Aristotelian appeals. When you're trying to balance any good composition, you want some kind of variety of source types. And if you have, statistics and numbers and percentages and cold, hard factual data that's often gleaned from secondary research, but again, at times can be primary, and then balancing that against individual voices, the human connection, like Will's doing with the songs, that really adds an element of sentiment and pathos to a paper that can really humanize it. And I think this blending of these types of sources can make for fascinating results with student work. And if faculty can see that, and if we can, as librarians, help faculty to explore that and consider that as an option, as opposed to just everything must be peer reviewed, then I think we can step into a space where different types of unique resources can be adequate and sufficient and wonderful for these projects, and hopefully get more of that balance that we're seeking.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of back what you're saying, Dustin, I think it's, it's obvious that we're going to have our history faculty members reaching out to us for instruction, but it's really trying to get those relationships built with, like the business department, with mass communications. There's a lot that can be said for archives in terms of, we have a Walker Percy check collection that I'd love to get a business class in here with.
Excellent. So being conscious of time, I'll ask one more question and then we'll turn it over to the audience at large. And I wonder if you have recommendations for those of us who may want to get involved with including primary sources in our instruction, especially if we don't work in the archives necessarily. What are some thoughts that you have on that?
I'll just say, as a sometimes college instructor also, and just one of the things that Dustin has emphasized that has been really compelling for me is like, yeah, doing field work in ethnography, you're creating primary sources. So to think about, getting students out into their communities and learning from other people. I mean, especially in 2024, after what we've been through with COVID and everything, that's just, it's hard to think of, it's a great thing to make a priority. And I'm putting that into conversation with how we think about sources and archives. Yeah, really compelling to me.
I'll step in here as well. Some recommendations, and I think Janine mentioned this a bit earlier, a couple of points that I want to just repeat. Liaisonships. If I'm a liaison for a particular department, whether that's business or, liberal arts and maybe the fine arts portion within that, what are the particular certifications and degrees that those students are seeking? And going further, what are potential primary sources for those students? I could see dedicated tabs on research guides being just for primary sources that we find for a particular group of students. I can see going to departmental meetings as that library liaison to say, hey, have you considered primary sources and the benefits that they can provide for your students in this particular emphasis? So again, it's not just the one-shot session, which maybe there could be a small segment, but often, let's face it, we're really pressed for time in 45 minutes to cover everything. So maybe it's with the liaisonships, maybe it's with the research guides. I even noticed the other day, if you go to EBSCO, and we all deal with EBSCO, there's a filter for primary source documents. I had rarely ever clicked that button. We all know about the peer review button. We know about the full text button, but have we ever tried the primary source documents button? This will often bring up government documents or AP videos or reports, and this can be valuable as well. So I think there's a combination of things we can do. Currently, for example, I'm working on a seminar to just talk about source documents, primary, secondary, tertiary. What are they? How can we use them? Where can we access them through our particular interface? And I think those types of seminars could be useful at any institution.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, on the other side of the coin, getting to know your student body. Go seek out student organizations, let them know what collections you have available. Even if you're at an institution that doesn't have an in-house archive, get to know what their research interests are. Let them know that there are digital collections out there that can support their research needs. I think the possibilities really are endless in terms of outreach, with be it whether it's the students or the faculty. Just get yourself out there as much as possible.
I'll just add one thing too, because one of my most successful primary source instruction sessions was with a sociology class. And I did it with all things that I pulled out of the general collection. I had the bound Life magazines, which are full of excellent advertising and news items of the day. publish song lyrics, and we could talk about what kind of primary source the Billboard charts are for a given year, children's books as primary sources for all sorts of cultural phenomena. There are many things just sort of sitting around on the shelves, not necessarily, medieval manuscripts and things of that nature, that we can use as primary sources and really have engaging conversations with our students. So a quick thank you to the panelists, and then I think we can turn it over to the audience to see if there are any questions from anyone else.
Can I acknowledge Beverly Clement's comment? Yeah, thank you for your comment. And I'd just like to point out that, yeah, the Spanish traditions in Louisiana are not as isolated as people have like to imagine. And yeah, they're connected with Mexican corridos and song traditions from all over this the circumgulf Caribbean region. So that's one of the things we want to do is connect the dots and yeah, point out those connections.
Yes, thank you all for all of those thoughtful insights. So since and Adam for helping us shift into a Q&A session here. Caitlin, are there any questions from the chat or the Q&A that have popped up?
That is just Beverly's comment. I think Shaquani has her hand raised.
Oh, yes, Shakrani.
I do. I just wanted to add a little bit from the perspective of the public library about using primary sources. And I will say that my experience at Delgado really helped me to see the importance of integrating primary sources in our presentations to our students. And because their eyes glaze over when you're talking about databases and search terms and things. But as soon as you can bring this live component through primary sources, it's a whole different ballgame. And so some of the things that we were able to do in the public library is to partner with the Louisiana division, which is our archives on the 3rd floor at the main branch. And so we partnered with some of our schools to have them come to the archives and incorporate some of those primary source materials in their research papers. But we also targeted with our digital librarian to acquire the history makers, which the teachers were really excited about having access to that database, which is all primary source materials, interviews, and things like that. So incorporating that in our programming, incorporating that in our presentations at the schools to emphasize the importance of having that primary source material as a part of your storytelling and it's a part of your research. It also connects, I think the personal part connects our students to the history that is here in New Orleans, that they don't even recognize that they're walking in these historical spaces and that they are interacting with these people who have made changes in their community. And so our archive is able to highlight that, and these databases are able to highlight that as well. I just want to add that.
Yes. No, I love hearing the personal insights and experiences. And for sure, New Orleans, like a hub of so many cultures and so many things. We have some other hands raised. Alicia?
Hi. Oh, you can't see me. I've moved my camera.
Oh,
But,
that's okay. We can hear you.
And what I wanted to let you in on is something that I just recently found out from my friend Celine Holmes, who is also very, very big in trying to promote primary sources to young children. She teaches pre-K to 4th grade, and she has gotten pre-Kers like super excited in watching just an old video clip of when the trains would pass by and grab the mailbag. And so she just shows it to them, says, what do you think's happening? What do you see when that happens? But there is this network, and I'm putting it in the chat. It's called the TPS Teachers Network. And it has all sorts of resources there where people have already done research and put together collections or discuss different issues for where you can find, here's the Library of Congress collection, or talk to me, I see a need for something like this. So it's a really great resource if you're learning to teach with using primary sources, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel because somebody might have already created it for you. So just letting you know that's out there in the world of primary sources.
Thank you for sharing that. It is in the chat. We'll go to Will, and if anyone has any last minute questions for any of our panelists, please put it in the chat because we are wrapping up.
Yeah, Janine, I was really curious while you were talking about like what kinds of collections are you working on that fit or come out of this commitment to DEI and decoloniality? Like, can you give us an example?
Yeah, sure. So we have this really, really amazing collection. It's called the Cornet Collection, and Father Cornet was a Christian Belgian brother, and as we know, there's a long line of colonialism in the Congo, and so Father Cornet ended up in the Congo, but what he was doing was he was essentially just documenting, like they have hundreds of these field notebooks and photographs and photo negatives rather of Congolese art. And he was the first, I believe, director of the Congolese Museum and getting that off the ground. And so what we've been doing with that collection is we're just kind of in the initial stages of this, but we are getting things digitized, but we're also looking at now I wouldn't even say reparative description at this point because we are kind of on the grounds with the description, but being very careful in terms of like what objects might be considered sensitive and what might not need to be digitized. And so we're looking really closely at that, but we're also really looking at doing digital repatriation to like a Congolese delegation that are part of the museum as they're in their own attempts to kind of repatriate the art that has been stolen since like the 90s. So yeah, that's one example, and we're really excited about that. I think there's supposed to be a repatriation conference around African art, possibly like in the next year or so. Haven't heard any like recent updates, but yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Y'all, this was so interesting. I feel like we could talk another 30 minutes, but it is time to wrap it up. There will be an evaluation form in the chat. Please take a moment to give us some feedback, and that will help us prepare for next year's forum. If you're going to rewatch today's presentations or share with any of your colleagues, we're going to be posting our recordings to our YouTube channel. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. Our email will be put in the chat, nolailc@gmail.com. And we really thank you all for your time today, and we hope you can join us for the rest of our conference sessions this week. We are going all the way through Friday, so hope to see you again. Thank you, everyone.